Yeah, I know. If you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, you've been eating the content up. I've been making a lot of Sabres videos lately, just because there are so many awesome things to talk about when it comes to this organization. However, today's video is not necessarily just a Sabres video, it's kind of the next one in a series. We are continuing our talks of 1 year later, going over prospects taken in the 2022 NHL Entry Draft, and talking about their stories from last year up until now. Today, we are talking about a guy that is, as you probably know from the title and thumbnail, a Buffalo Sabres guy. But he's a very interesting player because alongside of Shane Wright, the guy we had talked about last week on Saturday, this player was supposed to be a top pick available. Now, sure, he was taken at the top of the draft, but not as highly as some people thought. This was a player that, in some people's minds, could have challenged for second or first overall, a year before the actual draft came and went. We talk all the time about how Shane Wright was the projected number 1 who dropped to 4, but today's video is going over a guy who had dropped from probably second or third all the way to 9th. Let's talk today about Matthew Savoie. Now, before we get into the profile here, I just wanted to give a bit of a reminder to all of y'all that yes, back in, let's say, 2020, 2021, 2022, even at the start of the year at least, we had this idea going around that the top 3 of the 2022 draft would follow some sort of a structure wherein Shane Wright was first, Matthew Savoie would have been second or third, and Brad Lambert would have been the other guy. These players made up the franchise label that we were tossing around there in 2022 ever since 2019-ish. Like, these guys were so good when they were so young, which is why they were so highly touted. But for Matthew Savoie, we had talked about how this guy ended up dropping from the second, third overall projection to 9th overall, which was actually a bit more in line with where the scouting outlets had him towards the end of the year. Matthew Savoie, as we had said, was a Buffalo Sabres guy drafted in the spot of 9th. He's 5'9", 179 right-handed center, 19 years old, playing out of the Wenatchee Wild in the WHL. I had to pause up for a little bit there because he was playing recently with the Winnipeg Ice. They have since relocated, so it's no longer the Ice. It's now the Wild. WW, as you could go out there and say. But, as we had talked about, Matthew Savoie was indeed ranked in the, let's just say 9-ish to 12 range in the draft. Elite Prospects had him at number 9, so right on the dot there. Same with TSN and Bob McKenzie. McKean's were a bit higher on him. They had him at 6, and Craig Button had him at number 19. In Matthew Savoie's draft season, he produced a heck of a lot of points. He played in the Winnipeg Ice system, had 90 points in 65 games played, 35 goals, and 55 assists. This is what the scouting report goes out there and says. Heavy crossover use and constant motion propel his high-pace, constantly attacking approach, making Matthew Savoie's every puck touch an opportunity to create a scoring chance. Then, Savoie stacks a brilliant first touch, handling skill, and in-stride wrister, and 1- and 2-touch passing ability on top of that skating and pace combo to ensure many of those chances aren't for naught. Now, part of the reason why Savoie was so highly touted earlier on in his entire draft-eligible career was because in the Dubuque Fighting Saints system in 2020-2021, so his draft minus 1 year, the guy was a point-per-game player in the USHL, which is pretty impressive considering he was only 16. Add to this the showcase he had in the Canadian Sports School Prep League when he was younger, and you had yourselves a guy who put himself on the map very early on. As you could probably tell, though, Savoie dropping to number 9 was a combination of the fact that other guys in the 2022 draft really bolstered their stock along the way. We all know the Cinderella story, I guess you could say, of Yuri Slafkovsky, how Simon Nemec found himself up in there too. But Matthew Savoie was always sort of in that 1B-ish tier of prospects in this range after the draft season began, and this was exemplified even further because he is only 5'9". He's not the biggest guy out there, and you know that NHL scouts have a preference towards players that happen to be bigger, but Matthew Savoie was taken by Buffalo, and Matthew Savoie had a pretty good draft plus 1 season, all things considered. You see, he stuck around with the Winnipeg Ice, and in 3 fewer games played, he scored 5 more points. In fact, the point production is so uncannily similar that you kind of have to look at it just to understand. In 65 games played last year, he had 90 points. In 62 games played this year, he had 95 points. So, very similar. He even had 3 more goals and 2 more assists as well. Very, very similar numbers. This guy went out there and just kind of had a better version of what he had last year, which is kind of impressive when you acknowledge the consistency there. Add to this the postseason run where he had 29 points in 19 games played. He was way over a point per game, good for him to exhibit that type of growth. He also was named to the second All-Star team in the East in the WHL this previous year. Now, the thing with Savoy is that if you talk about where he was before, where everything sort of aligned when you tried to project where he would be, a lot of the skills he had showed off in his draft year were just kind of fine-tuned and exemplified even further in this year. And if you wanted to talk about some of these things, let's go over on Adaber Prospects, because what they did was they had a write-up about Savoy back from May 2022, so a year ago before the draft. There is no disputing that Savoy had a fantastic season. His production did slow down a touch during the stretch drive of the year, and some scouts have raised questions about how his game will translate at the pro level, but his raw skill is undeniable. If you skip over to the May 2023 report, the writer Kevin Wong goes out there and talks about how Savoy's draft plus 1 year came with huge expectations, and while the speedy scoring center started his season slowly, his level of production rose as the year progressed. He finished 7th in WHL scoring and was second amongst Winnipeg players, only behind Zach Benson, who was also a Buffalo Sabres prospect. His game has also become more well-rounded. Savoy was one of his team's most important defensive forwards in 22-23. So far in the WHL playoffs, he had the points that ranked him 3rd amongst playoff scorers, and Buffalo Sabres fans should be excited for his sophomore training camp in September. And yeah, we kind of ignored that fact this entire video, but Zach Benson, also a Buffalo Sabres guy, was the top dog on the Winnipeg ice, alongside of Savoy. These two have a chemistry. They work together very well. To help us out with that, we're going over onto the hockey news, because on July 18th, 2023, Tony Ferrari went out there and wrote about the prospect pool overview for this team. There are a few paragraphs in here that kind of connect the two players together. It all starts with the dynamic duo drafted from Winnipeg over the last 2 years. Savoy and Benson could bring their chemistry and flair they've torn up the WHL with to the NHL as they develop over the next couple of seasons. Matthew Savoie plays a high-paced game with skill and creativity. Zach Benson is a cerebral creator who exploits opponents with some of the most intelligent play-connecting abilities we've seen from a prospect in recent years. Together, the Sabres could fill out a third of their top 6. The article is a really good read, and as you go towards the end, it talks about the possibilities, how some of these guys, like Matthew Savoie, could potentially move over to the wing, and I feel like Savoie as a winger would actually be a really good type of transition into the NHL, because what Savoie excels at tremendously was his playmaking ability, his skills. He plays such a razzle-dazzle type of game where it's like he's got the puck skills to dangle by guys and make super creative on-the-fly passing decisions, and he plays like he knows that that is what he's good at. There's a certain quality to Matthew Savoie where if you give him enough time and space, he can really make you look stupid, and that is part of what makes him so interesting as a player to place on the wing, because if you play him at center, okay, there's a little bit more responsibility there. You need to play with a bit more pace. For Matthew Savoie, he is a speedster, he is a high-octane player, but when it comes to that creative edge, I feel like there's a lot more potential of him being on the wing and allowing him to focus more so on just finding passing lanes and opening up space and using his puck skills to navigate the offensive zone. Of course, though, he is a bit smaller. 5'9" definitely is nothing to scoff at, and that has been one of the main factors holding Savoie back from being really given much attention, I feel. Like, I don't know about you, but I feel like nobody really talked about Matthew Savoie this entire year. Like, we heard a lot about other prospects in Buffalo, Yuri Kulich, and all these other guys that were very good and doing their thing, but for Savoie, I feel like there really wasn't much of a hype train for this guy at all. Maybe it was different in Buffalo Sabres communities, but overall, just in the regular prospect world, I didn't really see anybody outside of the occasional Sabres fan once in a while bringing this guy's name up. But either way, 1 year later, Savoie is still looking pretty good. In fact, he looks just a tad better. Maybe as much better as you would have hoped for, I feel. This could have been the perfect Draft Plus 1 season, all things considered, especially considering the acquisition of Zach Benson as well. So, if you're a Buffalo Sabres fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Matthew Savoie 1 year after the draft? What are your thoughts about the pick back then? What are your thoughts about how he progressed since then? And what are your thoughts on having Benson and Savoie as a potential duo on the Buffalo Sabres long term? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.